The year is 1898. The humidity of Bombay hangs heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of salt and dust. Outside the grand wrought iron gates of the Watson's Hotel, the sounds of the British Empire are deafening. The click-clap of polished hooves, the clinking of crystal glasses, the laughter of colonial officers who believe the sun will never set on their dominion. Standing just outside those gates is a man with a beard as white as snow and eyes that burn with a quiet, terrifying intensity. He is Jamsetji Tata. He is wealthy, he is brilliant, and he is a titan of trade. Yet he is stopped by a simple sign, a wooden placard that cuts deeper than any bayonet. For Europeans only, dogs and Indians not allowed. He does not shout, he does not plead, he simply turns around, his boots crunching against the gravel. But in that silence, a tectonic shift occurs. In the fiery furnace of that humiliation, a vow is forged. He looks toward the Apollo Bunder, the reclamation land jutting into the Arabian Sea, and imagines not just a hotel that will outshine the Watsons, but an empire that will outlast the British. He imagines steel mills rising from the jungle, hydroelectric dams taming the rivers, and a nation that stands on its own spine, independent and proud. He walks away from the hotel, but he is walking toward a destiny that will carry 1 billion people with him. This is not just the story of a business, it is the story of a family that decided to build a country. If you wish to walk the path of visionaries who turned the suit of industry into the soul of a nation, please subscribe and join us as we open the archives of the Tata Dynasty. The story of modern India does not begin in the parliament halls of New Delhi, nor does it begin with the first raising of the tricolor flag in 1947. It begins much earlier, in the dusty, sun-baked town of Navsari, Gujarat, in the year 1839. Here, in a narrow lane filled with the scent of sandalwood and the low murmurs of prayer, Jamsetji Tata was born into a family of Parsi priests. To understand the empire, one must understand the man's faith. The Parsis, descendants of Persian refugees who fled religious persecution centuries ago, hold a distinct worldview defined by 3 simple tenets: humata, hukta, varshta, good thoughts, good words, good deeds. They believe that wealth is not a sin, but a responsibility. It is fire that must be tended, not for one's own warmth, but to light the way for others. Young Jamsetji grew up in the shadow of the fire temple, absorbing the quiet discipline of a community that had survived by making itself indispensable. But the quiet life of a priest was not written in his stars. The 19th century was a time of rapacious change. The British East India Company was dissolving into the direct rule of the Crown, and Bombay was transforming into the urbs prima in Indies, the first city of India. At the age of 13, Jamsetji was called to this teeming metropolis by his father to join the family trading business. Bombay in the 1850s was a sensory assault. It was a city of opium clippers, cotton bales, and the sharp, salty tang of the Arabian Sea. It was here, amidst the jostling crowds and the clinking of silver rupees, that Jamsetji received a Western education at Elphinstone College. He was a brilliant student, devouring the works of Dickens and Thackeray, but his real education happened on the docks. He watched ships leave laden with raw Indian cotton, only to return months later carrying finished British cloth sold back to Indians at a premium. He saw the economic lifeblood of his country being siphoned off, processed in the mills of Lancashire, and sold back to the very hands that picked the crop. It was a realization that would haunt him. But it was a trip to Manchester, England in the 1960s that turned that haunting into a mission. Stepping off the train in Manchester, Jamsetji walked into the Black Country. The sky was choked with soot, the air vibrated with the relentless thrum of thousands of power looms. To a casual observer, it was a hellscape of industrial noise. To Jamsetji Tata, it was a revelation. He saw the power of steam, he saw the efficiency of the machine, and he asked a dangerous question. Why not us?
Why must India remain a land of peasants and clerks? Why could the hum of the spindle not sing in the valleys of Maharashtra? He returned to India not just as a merchant, but as an industrialist with a fire in his belly. While other Indian businessmen were content to trade, Jamsetji wanted to create. In 1874, he did the unthinkable. He bypassed the saturated markets of Bombay and ventured deep into central India to the swampy, snake-infested town of Nagpur. Critics laughed. They called it Tata's folly. Why build a cotton mill in the middle of nowhere? But Jamsetji saw what they missed. Nagpur was right next to the cotton fields, and it had a railway junction. He named his venture the Empress Mills, a nod to Queen Victoria, but the soul of the mill was distinctly Indian. Inside the Empress Mills, Jamsetji began to rewrite the rules of capitalism. In an era when British mill owners treated workers like disposable cogs, forcing them to work 16 hours a day in unventilated death traps, Jamsetji installed humidifiers and fire sprinklers. He built a creche for the women's children. He instituted a pension fund. He believed a happy worker was an efficient worker. It was a radical, human-centric approach that baffled his contemporaries. They chased profit. He chased excellence.
But textiles were just the beginning. As the 19th century drew to a close, Jamsetji's vision expanded beyond cloth. He began to dream of iron. He traveled to the United States, to the great steel towns of Pittsburgh and Cleveland. He stood before the blast furnaces of Carnegie and saw the molten rivers of steel that formed the skeleton of the modern world. He realized that a nation without steel is a nation without a spine. If India was ever to be free, truly free, it needed to forge its own weapons, build its own bridges, and lay its own rails. He returned to the British Raj with a proposal that was met with icy skepticism. The colonial administration viewed India as a market, not a manufacturer. When Jamsetji proposed a massive steel plant in the Indian jungle, Sir Frederick Upcott, the chief commissioner of the Great Indian Peninsula Railway, scoffed with colonial arrogance. "Do you mean to say that the Tatas proposed to make steel rails to British specifications?" Upcott sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why, I will undertake to eat every pound of steel rail they succeed in making." It was an insult meant to crush the spirit. Instead, it became the fuel for a crusade. Jamsetji did not retort in anger. He simply went to work. He knew the British would not help him. He would have to find the iron himself in the unforgiving, uncharted wilderness of the Indian subcontinent. Jamsetji knew that if the British establishment would not support him, he would turn to the only nation that rivaled their industrial might, the United States. In 1902, an aging Jamsetji traveled to Pittsburgh, the smoky heart of American steel. There he met the renowned geologist Charles Perrin. The meeting was legendary. Jamsetji, with his flowing white beard and Parsi robes, looked like a prophet from the Old Testament. Perrin was a man of science and hard rock. Jamsetji placed a heavy hand on the American's shoulder and said, "I have a dream of an India that stands tall. Will you help me build it?" Perrin was captivated. He left the comfort of America for the blistering heat of the central Indian hinterlands. The search for iron was an odyssey of misery. For months, Jamsetji and his associates, including his eager son J.R.D, trekked through the dense tiger-infested jungles of the central provinces. They traveled by bullock cart, sleeping in tents, fighting off malaria, cholera, and the crushing despair of failure. They were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of France. Weeks turned into months. The British officials laughed from their clubs in Calcutta, convinced the native was chasing ghosts. But history turns on the smallest of hinges. On a sweltering afternoon, while inspecting a map in a dusty village, the team stumbled upon a geological report from an old Irish surveyor. It pointed them toward a place called Dali Rajhara.
When they arrived, Charles Perrin stood in stunned silence. He wasn't looking at a mine, he was looking at a mountain. The hill before them was composed of almost solid iron ore. He picked up a handful of the red earth, feeling the weight of destiny in his palm. It was one of the finest iron deposits the world had ever seen. They had found the fuel for the empire. But while the dream of steel was being forged in the jungle, Jamshedji was fighting a different battle in the city of Bombay. The late 1890s brought the bubonic plague to the city. Bombay, the jewel of the Raj, became a necropolis. People fled in droves, commerce halted, the streets were silent save for the rattle of death carts. The city's spirit was broken. Jamshedji, who loved Bombay with a fierce, possessive loyalty, decided that the city needed a symbol of resilience, something to tell the world that Bombay was not dead. He announced plans to build the finest hotel the East had ever seen. The skeptics, who had mocked his steel ambitions, now questioned his sanity. Why build a palace in a plague-ridden city, and why build it on reclaimed marshland facing the harbor? But Jamshedji was driven by that singular moment of humiliation at the Watson's Hotel. He remembered the sign, he remembered the sting of being treated as a second-class citizen in the land of his ancestors. He vowed to build a place where an Indian could walk with his head held high, a place where the only entry requirement was not the color of one's skin, but the content of one's character, and of course, the ability to pay the bill. The construction of the Taj Mahal Palace was a spectacle of defiance. Jamshedji spared no expense. He imported red sandstone from Rajasthan, the same stone used by the Mughal emperors. He brought in spun iron pillars from Paris. He installed the first electric grid in Bombay solely to power the hotel's lights, making it the only building in the city that glowed after dark like a beacon of modernity. He installed German elevators, Turkish baths, and an American soda fountain. He personally traveled to Europe to hand-select the cutlery and the linens. This was not just a business venture, it was a love letter to his city and a gauntlet thrown down to the British Raj. On December 16, 1903, the doors opened. The guests gasped as they walked into the lobby. It was a cathedral of luxury. Above them, a massive dome floated like a cloud. The electric lights, a miracle to many who had only ever known oil lamps, reflected off the polished marble floors. And unlike the Watsons, the doors of the Taj swung open for everyone. Maharajas rubbed shoulders with British lords. Indian merchants dined near American travelers. In the dining room, the color bar was dissolved by the clinking of crystal glasses.
Jamsetji had built his monument, but time, the one commodity he could not buy, was running out. By 1904, his health was failing. The steel plant was still a blueprint. The hydroelectric dams were still just sketches on paper. He traveled to Germany for treatment, but he knew the end was near. On his deathbed in Bad Nauheim, he called his son Dorabji and his cousin J.R.D. Tata to his side. He did not speak of money, he spoke of the work left undone. "If you cannot make it greater," he whispered, his voice struggling for air, "at least preserve what I have made." He gave them final instructions for the steel city he would never see. Be sure to lay wide streets planted with shady trees, every other of a quick-growing variety, he instructed, dreaming of a worker's paradise until his final breath. Be sure that there is plenty of space for lawns and gardens. Reserve large areas for football and hockey. Earmark areas for Hindu temples, Mohammedan mosques, and Christian churches. On May 19, 1904, the prophet of steel and steam closed his eyes. He died on foreign soil, far from the city he loved and the jungle he sought to tame. The world thought the vision had died with the visionary. The British officials breathed a sigh of relief, assuming the Tata folly would now collapse under the weight of inheritance disputes and lack of leadership. They were wrong.
The flame had passed, and in the jungles of Bihar, the ground was about to break. The burden of the dream now fell on the broad shoulders of J.R.D. Tata. He was the eldest son, a man of quiet determination who carried his father's blueprint like a sacred text. But a blueprint is not a factory, and a dream requires gold to become reality. In 1906, J.R.D. traveled to London, the financial capital of the world, seeking investors for the steel plant. He walked the plush corridors of the city, meeting with bankers and tycoons. He showed them the geological reports from Dali Rajhara. He showed them the projections. But the British financiers looked at him with the same skepticism that Sir Frederick Upcott had shown. They saw a jungle project run by natives as a gamble too far. They shut their checkbooks. They told him to go home. J.R.D. returned to Bombay in 1907, dejected but not defeated. As his ship docked, he found a city and a country in the grip of a new fever. The British Viceroy, Lord Curzon, had partitioned Bengal, sparking a massive nationalist outcry. The Swadeshi movement was sweeping the nation, a call to boycott British goods and support indigenous industry. The cry was, "Buy Indian." It was a moment of serendipity that history rarely grants. J.R.D. realized he didn't need the bankers of London, he had the people of India. On August 26, 1907, the Tata family issued a prospectus for the Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO. They appealed directly to the Indian public. What followed was a scene that had never been witnessed in the colonial world. From early morning, a crowd gathered outside the Tata offices on Hornby Road. It was not a crowd of wealthy merchants. It was a sea of ordinary faces. There were pensioners, clerks, and housewives. Legend tells of women unclasping their gold necklaces and bangles, slapping them onto the counter to buy shares. Peasant farmers brought bags of silver rupees saved from harvests. They weren't just investing in a company, they were buying a stake in their own dignity. They were voting with their wallets for an industrial India. Within 3 weeks, the entire capital required, £1.6 million, a staggering sum for the time, was raised. The Tata family had tapped into the soul of the nation. With the money secured, the war against the jungle began. In the village of Sakchi, in the dense forests of Bihar, now Jharkhand, the ground was broken. It was a logistical nightmare. American engineers, recruited by Perrin, worked alongside thousands of Indian tribal laborers. They battled 120 degrees heat, cholera openings, and wild elephants that trampled the supply lines. At night, the roar of tigers kept the camp awake. But slowly, painfully, the skyline began to change. The green canopy was pierced by the black silhouettes of smokestacks. On February 16, 1912, the silence of the jungle was shattered by a deafening roar. The first blast furnace was fired. As the molten iron, orange, liquid, and terrifyingly beautiful, flowed into the ladles, the cheers of the workers drowned out the machinery. India had made steel. And what of Sir Frederick Upcott and his promise to eat every pound of Tata rails? When World War I broke out in 1914, the British Empire found itself in a desperate crisis. Their supply lines in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, were crumbling. They needed rails to move troops and supplies, but British steel mills were diverted to making munitions. Desperate, the empire turned to the very plant they had mocked. Tata Steel shipped 1,500 miles of steel rails to the British Army. The rails that carried the soldiers to victory in the Middle East were forged in the Indian jungle. The Viceroy, Lord Chelmsford, later admitted, "I can hardly imagine what we would have done if the Tata Company had not been able to give us steel rails." It is said that had Upcott kept his promise, he would have had a very fatal case of indigestion. By the end of the war, the village of Sakchi had transformed into a bustling metropolis. In honor of the man who dreamed it, the Viceroy renamed the city Jamshedpur. It was a city of steel, but built with a heart.
The first chapter of the dynasty was complete. The Tatas had conquered the land, with the Taj, and the earth, with the steel. They had proven that Indian enterprise could rival the world. But as the roaring 20s approached, a new frontier beckoned. The earth was conquered, but the sky remained empty. In a boarding school in France, a young man with a Parsi father and a French mother was watching the early aviators perform death-defying stunts over the fields of Normandy. His name was Jahangir Ratanji Tata, known simply as J. He watched the biplanes dance in the clouds, and he felt a pull stronger than gravity. The empire of steel was about to get wings. The aviator's sky. If Jamsetji Tata was the earth, solid, immovable, rooted in the iron ore of the subcontinent, then the man who would define the next century of the dynasty was the wind. The scene shifts from the soot-choked skies of Manchester to the azure coast of Hardelo, France. The year is 1929. A young man with a chiseled jawline, deep-set eyes, and an elegance that seems effortless stands on a grassy airfield. He is watching a biplane loop through the clouds, his heart beating in sync with the engine's roar. His name is Jahangir Ratanji Tata, known to the world simply as J.R.D. and to his friends as J. Born to a Parsi father and a French mother, J.R.D. was a citizen of the world. He spoke French before he spoke English. He had the soul of an artist trapped in the destiny of an industrialist. As a neighbor of the legendary aviator Louis Blériot, the first man to fly across the English Channel, young J didn't just dream of flying, he was infected by it. In 1929, he became the first person in India to be issued a pilot's license, license number 1. It was a slip of paper that would change the trajectory of a nation. But in the early 1930s, the Tata Empire was grounded. The steel plant was struggling through the Great Depression. The mills were facing stiff competition. The family needed a steady hand, not a daredevil. Yet J.R.D. saw an opportunity where others saw only empty air. He believed that a modern nation needed to move faster than the speed of a steam train. On October 15, 1932, the history of Indian transport was rewritten, not with a ribbon-cutting ceremony, but with the sputter of a single engine. Dawn broke over the Drig Road Aerodrome in Karachi, now Pakistan. J.R.D. Tata, wearing aviator goggles and a leather jacket, climbed into the cockpit of a fragile single-engine de Havilland puss moth. There were no passengers. In the back, strapped down tight, were sacks of airmail letters that had arrived from London. He taxied down the runway and lifted off into the hazy morning sky. For hours, he was alone with the wind and the roar of the Gipsy 3 engine, navigating by following the railway lines below, the iron compass. He flew south, over the deserts of Gujarat, over the coastline where his ancestors had landed centuries before, finally descending toward the mudflats of Juhu in Bombay. There was no radio control tower, there was no tarmac, just a flat stretch of dried mud. As the wheels touched down, kicking up a cloud of dust, Tata Airlines was born. It was a humble beginning. The headquarters was a palm-thatched shed. The runway flooded during the monsoon, forcing operations to move to Pune. But J.R.D. ran this tiny operation with the precision of a Swiss watch. He believed that an airline was the ultimate test of a country's modernity. The airline business is not just about flying, it is about perfection, he would say. While the aviator was his passion, destiny had a heavier crown waiting for him. In 1938, Sir Nauroji Saklatwala, the chairman of the Tata Group, died of a heart attack. The board looked around the table.
They needed someone who understood both the East and the West, someone with the vision of Jamsetji Tata and the modern edge of the 20th century. They turned to the 34-year-old pilot. J.R.D. Tata became the chairman of the largest industrial group in India. He was young, untested in heavy industry, and tasked with leading a congregation of giants: steel, power, textiles, and chemicals. The old guard was skeptical. They saw a playboy pilot. They didn't see the steel beneath the silk. But J.R.D. possessed a management style that was decades ahead of his time. Unlike the autocratic styles of American tycoons, J.R.D. led by consensus. He surrounded himself with brilliant men, Homi Modi, John Mathai, Ardashir Dalal, and he gave them autonomy. He famously said, "I do not want to be a genius. I want to be a creator of geniuses." Under his stewardship, the empire entered a golden age. He expanded into chemicals with Tata Chemicals in 1939. He founded Tata Motors, then Telco, in 1945 to build locomotives and engineering products. He envisioned a self-reliant India that made everything from salt to trucks. But the jewel in his crown remained the airline. By 1946, Tata Airlines had become Air India. It went public, and soon the graceful Constellation planes featuring the iconic Maharaja mascot were landing in London, Geneva, and Cairo. J.R.D. was obsessed with standards. He would fly on his own planes incognito, walking the aisles, checking if the coffee was hot, if the cutlery was polished, if the flight attendants were smiling. He wanted Air India to be the best airline in the world, not just good for India. And for a glorious decade, it was. It was the envy of Singapore Airlines and Cathay Pacific.
However, the winds of history were shifting again. In 1947, the Union Jack was lowered and the tricolor was raised. India was free. The joy in Bombay House, the Tata headquarters, was palpable. They had helped build the infrastructure of this freedom. They assumed that in a free India, their enterprise would be unleashed to conquer the world. They were wrong. The political climate was cooling. The new government in New Delhi, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, believed in socialism. They viewed large private conglomerates not as nation builders, but as potential exploiters. They believed the state should command the heights of the economy. J.R.D. Tata, the man who had connected India to the world, was about to face a betrayal that would break his heart. The years following 1947 were a time of dizzying contradiction. In the streets, there was the euphoria of freedom. Flags waved and the air tasted of promise. But in the ministries of New Delhi, the air tasted of dust and red tape. The British Raj had departed, only to be replaced by the License Raj, a labyrinthian system of permits, quotas, and regulations designed to choke the very capitalism that J.R.D. Tata championed. J.R.D. and Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru shared a strange, complex friendship. They were both aristocrats in their own way, both educated in Europe, both deeply patriotic. They would walk together in the gardens of the Prime Minister's residence, discussing the future of the nation. But while Nehru saw profit as a dirty word, a necessary evil to be curbed, J.R.D. saw it as the engine of prosperity. Their correspondence, preserved in the archives, reads like a tragic dialogue between two lovers who want the same thing but speak different languages. J.R.D. would write long, passionate letters arguing that the government should regulate, not own. The public sector, he warned, should not become a burial ground for the taxpayers' money. Nehru would reply with polite condescension, dismissing J.R.D.'s fears as the anxieties of a rich man who didn't understand the suffering of the poor. The blow, when it finally came, was swift and personal. It was 1953. Rumors began to swirl in the corridors of power that the government intended to nationalize the aviation sector.
J.R.D. heard whispers, but he refused to believe that Nehru, his friend, would seize the airline he had built from scratch without so much as a consultation. Air India wasn't just a company to J.R.D., it was his art. It was the only airline in the world that made a profit from year one, a symbol of Indian excellence that landed in London with the punctuality of Big Ben. Then came the phone call. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a notification. The government passed the Air Corporations Act. Overnight, Air India was stripped from the Tata Group. The child was torn from the parent. J.R.D. was devastated. In a private letter, he wrote of his pain and sorrow at the way the decision was handled, the lack of courtesy, the bureaucratic coldness. It was a humiliation that mirrored his grandfather's rejection at the Watsons Hotel, but this time it came from his own countrymen. Yet what happened next defined the character of the man and the dynasty. Nehru, realizing that the government had the ownership but not the expertise to run a world-class airline, asked J.R.D. to stay on as chairman. A lesser man would have walked away in bitterness. J.R.D. accepted. He agreed to work for the government, for the very entity that stole his company, for zero salary. For the next 25 years, he ran Air India as if he still owned it, driven by a loyalty to the nation that superseded his ego. But the empire did not stop growing just because the skies were clouded. If the government blocked them in one direction, the Tatas flowed like water to another. While the politicians argued over 5-year plans, J.R.D. looked at the long horizon of science. He formed a partnership with Dr. Homi Bhabha, the father of India's nuclear program. Bhabha needed a home for his research. The government was too slow to build it, so the Tatas stepped in. In 1945, they established the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, TIFR. It was housed initially in a bungalow owned by J.R.D.'s aunt. From that bungalow came the seeds of India's atomic energy program and its space program. J.R.D. understood what Jamshedji preached: a nation cannot be great if it relies on others for knowledge. Then he turned his eyes to the suffering of the common man. In 1941, the Tata Memorial Hospital was commissioned, the first dedicated cancer treatment center in India. At a time when cancer was a death sentence whispered in fear, the Tatas built a sanctuary of hope, treating thousands of patients for free. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, the Tata Group became a state within a state. While the politicians argued over 5-year plans, J.R.D. navigated the treacherous waters of the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which punished companies simply for being too big. He spent half his time in Delhi, waiting in anterooms, pleading for permission to expand a factory or modernize a machine. It was a grueling, thankless era. The glamorous aviator had become the weary guardian. He held the disparate group together through the sheer force of his personality. The satraps, the powerful chieftains who ran the individual companies, like Russi Modi at Tata Steel and Darbari Seth at Tata Chemicals, were loyal to J.R.D., but they ran their fiefdoms with near total autonomy.
As the 1980s dawned, the world was changing. The silicon chip was replacing the smokestack. J.R.D., now in his late 70s, realized that the empire needed to pivot again. He saw the potential in a young, bespectacled engineer named Fakir Chand Kohli, who proposed a strange idea: selling Indian engineering intellect to the world. They called it Tata Consultancy Services, TCS. At the time, nobody knew what software really meant. It was a small experiment, a footnote in the annual report. Nobody suspected that this small venture would one day become the crown jewel, worth more than all the steel mills and power plants combined. But J.R.D. knew his time was ending. The cockpit needed a new pilot. The satraps were powerful, ambitious, and circling the throne. The question on everyone's lips in Bombay House was, who comes next? By the late 1980s, the Tata Group resembled a feudal kingdom more than a modern corporation. J.R.D. Tata was the emperor, loved and revered, but his power was largely symbolic. The real power lay in the hands of the satraps, the powerful chieftains who ran the individual companies. Men like Russi Modi at Tata Steel, who flew his own private plane and ate 16 egg omelets. Darbari Seth, the chemical king, who ran Tata Chemicals like a personal fiefdom, and Ajit Kirkar, who ruled the Taj Hotels. These men were titans. They were brilliant, autocratic, and fiercely independent. They paid homage to J.R.D. in Bombay House, but once they returned to their factories in Jamshedpur or Mithapur, they answered to no one. They controlled the cash flows. They controlled the appointments. J.R.D., now in his twilight years, watched this fragmentation with growing unease. He knew that the protective walls of the license Raj were crumbling. The world was knocking at the door. If the Tata Group remained a collection of warring tribes, it would be slaughtered by global competition. The empire needed to be unified. It needed a successor who could tame the lions. But who? The satraps all believed the crown belonged to them. They were the men of iron and chemicals, the men who had delivered profits for decades. In the background, almost invisible against the glare of these giant personalities, stood a quiet, introverted man named Ratan Tata. Ratan was J.R.D.'s nephew, but he had none of the aviator's swashbuckling flair. He was an architect by training, educated at Cornell in America. He was soft-spoken, almost shy. He didn't stride into rooms. He walked in hesitantly. His track record within the group was viewed with skepticism. He had been given charge of Nelco, National Radio and Electronics Company, a struggling consumer electronics unit. He had fought hard to turn it around, but labor strikes and economic headwinds had made it a bruising battle. To the satraps, Ratan was a lightweight. They called him the boy. They whispered that he had the wrong temperament for business, too gentle, too ethical, too American. They saw him as a placeholder, someone they could easily manipulate once the old man was gone. Then came 1991. It was the year that split the history of modern India in two. Faced with a balance of payments crisis, the Indian government, led by Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, slashed the red tape of the license Raj. The economy was opened. Foreign companies were invited in. The protected garden in which the Tata satraps had thrived was suddenly exposed to the harsh winds of the global jungle. In this atmosphere of upheaval, on a quiet afternoon in March 1991, J.R.D. Tata made his final, most decisive move. He called a board meeting in Bombay House. There was no agenda distributed. The directors sat around the polished oval table, expecting a routine discussion. J.R.D. stood up. He spoke briefly, his voice emotional but steady. He announced that he was stepping down after 53 years at the helm. A silence descended on the room. Then J.R.D. turned to the man sitting quietly at the end of the table. He proposed, he said, that Ratan take my place. The shock was electric. The satraps exchanged glances. Russi Modi was visibly stunned. But out of respect for the patriarch, no one dissented. Ratan Naval Tata was named the chairman of Tata Sons. J.R.D. had flown his final sortie. He would live for another 2 years, passing away in a hospital in Geneva, the city of his birth, in 1993. On his death, the Indian Parliament suspended its session, a tribute reserved usually for heads of state. He was the last of the great gentleman industrialists, a man who proved that you could build an empire without losing your soul. But as the flowers were laid on J.R.D.'s grave, the knives were being sharpened in the boardrooms. Ratan Tata stepped into the role of chairman with a target on his back. The press ridiculed him, the stock market was unimpressed, and the satraps, entrenched in their power, crossed their arms and waited for him to fail.
They had the loyalty of the workers, the support of the politicians, and the profits of the group. Ratan had nothing but a title. The architect had inherited a house divided. To save it, he would have to do something that went against his very nature. He would have to go to war. The Titan in the shadows. The year is 1993. The setting is the hushed, carpeted corridor of Bombay House, the headquarters of the Tata Group. It is a building that smells of old money and quiet power. But inside the corner office on the 4th floor, the air is thin. Ratan Tata sits behind the desk that J.R.D. vacated. He is 54 years old, but he looks younger, his face unlined, his demeanor hesitant.
Outside the window, the new India is roaring. The reforms of 1991 have unleashed a chaotic energy. Foreign cars are appearing on the streets. Coca-Cola is back. The stock market is booming. But inside the Tata Group, the mood is grim. The conglomerate Ratan inherited is a dinosaur. It comprises over 100 companies, producing everything from tea to trucks, but they are disjointed. There is no central strategy. Worse, the Tata holding company, Tata Sons, owns very small percentages of the key companies. In Tata Steel, for instance, the parent company holds less than 5% of the shares. This is the terrifying reality Ratan wakes up to. He is the chairman, but he does not have control. The satraps know this. Rusi Modi, the uncrowned king of Jamshedpur, openly mocks Ratan in the press. Modi runs Tata Steel from a lavish suite in Calcutta, ignoring directives from Bombay. He appoints his own favorites to the board, treating the steel giant as his private property. Darbari Seth at Tata Chemicals is busy launching his own brands, barely acknowledging the Tata parentage. They see Ratan as a temporary inconvenience. They believe that if they ignore him long enough, he will fade away or the board will remove him. But they have fundamentally underestimated the architect. They mistake his politeness for weakness. They do not see that beneath the soft voice lies a core of tempered steel, forged in the humiliation of those early failures at Nelco. Ratan knows that if he does not centralize power, the group will break apart. Corporate raiders are already circling, eyeing the weak shareholding structures. If the Tatas don't own the Tatas, someone else soon will. Ratan's strategy is not a blitzkrieg, it is a siege. He begins with a masterstroke of corporate governance. He introduces a retirement age. He mandates that all executive directors must retire at 65 and non-executive chairmen at 75. It sounds like a dry, bureaucratic rule. In reality, it is a guillotine. The satraps are all old men. Rusi Modi is over 70. Darbari Seth is aging. This rule, applied universally, strips them of their thrones without Ratan having to fire a single shot. The backlash is ferocious. Rusi Modi goes to the media. He creates a public spectacle, accusing Ratan of destroying the family legacy. The business press takes Modi's side, painting Ratan as an insecure tyrant, dismantling the pillars of the group. The unions in Jamshedpur threaten to strike. Ratan stands alone. He does not engage in a shouting match. He simply holds the line. The group is greater than any individual, he repeats, quietly, persistently. One by one, the giants fall. Rusi Modi is forced out. Darbari Seth retires. Ajit Kerkar is removed from the Taj. It is a bloodless coup, executed with surgical precision. For the first time in decades, Bombay House is actually in charge. With the warlords gone, Ratan turns his attention to the crumbling fortress. He begins to shore up the shareholdings, using the cash from Tata Sons to buy back stock in the key companies. He creates a brand fee, demanding that any company using the Tata name must pay for the privilege and adhere to a code of conduct. He is stitching the quilt back together. But consolidation is boring.
Ratan knows that to truly lead, he needs to build something new. He needs a victory that is his own, not an inheritance from J.R.D. He looks at the roads of India. They are dominated by two vehicles, the clunky, ancient Ambassador and the tiny, cramping Maruti 800. There is nothing in between. The aspiring Indian middle class, the shopkeepers, the managers, the young families, have no car that reflects their ambition. In 1995, Ratan Tata walks onto the stage and makes a promise that sounds like a hallucination. He says, "We will build an Indian car, a car with the dimensions of a Zen, the internal space of an Ambassador, and the price of a Maruti." The industry laughs. Tata Motors makes trucks, big, heavy, loud trucks. They know nothing about passenger cars. They don't have the technology. They don't have the robots. Building a car from scratch is something only the Toyotas and Fords of the world do. He's dreaming, the critics sneer. He will bankrupt the company. Ratan ignores them. He sketches the design himself. He calls it the Indica. He doesn't want to buy the technology from the West. He wants to create it. He pushes his engineers to the breaking point. "Why can't we do it?" becomes his mantra. The factory floor in Pune transforms. It is a chaotic ballet of welding sparks and sleepless nights. Ratan is there constantly, obsessing over the curve of the fender, the sound of the door closing. He is betting the entire future of Tata Motors on a hatchback. The stakes are absolute. If the Indica fails, Ratan's leadership fails. The ghosts of the satraps are watching, waiting for the crash. January 15th, 1998. The Pragit Maidan in New Delhi is a madhouse. It is the Auto Expo, and the crowd surging toward the Tata Pavilion is unlike anything the organizers have ever seen. They are pushing, shoving, craning their necks to get a glimpse of the machine that promised to change their lives. When Ratan Tata pulls the sheet off the Tata Indica, the roar is deafening. It is a sleek, modern hatchback, designed in Italy but engineered in India. The tagline strikes a chord in the national psyche: more car per car. Within a week, 115,000 people book the vehicle, paying full deposits. It is the most successful launch in Indian automotive history. Ratan is hailed as a visionary. But the euphoria is short-lived.
Making a prototype is art. Mass production is war. As the first Indicas roll out of the Pune factory and onto the potholed roads of India, the dream begins to rattle. The air conditioning fails. The rear windows get stuck. The engine vibrates with a harsh, unrefined noise. The mileage, the holy grail of the Indian consumer, is lower than promised. The backlash is brutal. The customers feel betrayed. The press, which had built Ratan up, now gleefully tears him down. Ratan's folly, they call it. The stock price of Tata Motors tanks. The company posts a massive loss of 500 crore rupees. The satraps, watching from the sidelines, smirk. They were right, they whisper. The boy has crashed the car. Ratan is isolated. The pressure from the shareholders is immense. They demand that he cut his losses. Sell the car division, they plead. Stick to trucks. Stop bleeding money. With a heavy heart, Ratan agrees. It is a decision that feels like a surrender, an admission that perhaps the Indian dream was too big for reality. In 1999, Ratan Tata and his team fly to Detroit, the Motor City, to meet with Ford. They are there to sell the fledgling car business. The meeting takes place at Ford headquarters. The atmosphere is not one of partnership. It is one of imperial condescension. Across the table sits Bill Ford and his executives. They look at the Indian team with a mixture of pity and arrogance. The negotiations are tense, but it is a comment made by one of the Ford directors that stops time. "You do not know anything," the executive sneers, leaning back in his chair. "Why did you start the passenger car division at all? We are doing you a favor by buying this from you."
The room goes silent. The humiliation hangs in the air, thick and suffocating. For Ratan, time collapses. He is no longer in a boardroom in Michigan. He is standing outside the Watson's Hotel in 1898. He is feeling the same sting that Jamsetji felt when he read the sign, "Dogs and Indians Not Allowed." It is the age-old dismissal of the East by the West, the assumption that they are merely children playing with machines they do not understand. Ratan does not flip the table. He does not shout. He is a Tata, and dignity is the currency of the family. He listens to the insults in silence, but behind his glasses, the fire is lit. He stands up. "Thank you for your time," he says quietly. He walks out of the meeting. He tells his team, "We are going back." "To the hotel?" one asks. "No," Ratan replies, "to India." On the long flight back to Bombay, Ratan does not sleep. The humiliation in Detroit has clarified his vision. He realizes that selling would be the easy way out, but the Tatas do not take the easy way. He decides then and there not to sell. He will fix the car. He will fix the company. He will make them eat their words. He returns to the factory floor in Pune with the energy of a man possessed. He talks to the workers. He brings in foreign consultants to fix the quality issues. He launches the Indica V2, version 2. He markets it aggressively, fixing every flaw, tightening every bolt. "We will deliver a car that works," he tells his engineers, "and we will make a profit." Slowly, the tide turns. The Indica V2 begins to sell. The rattling stops. The mileage improves. The Indian taxi market, the ultimate test of durability, adopts the car. Within 3 years, the passenger car division breaks even. Then it becomes profitable. The Indica becomes a common sight on Indian roads, a symbol of national resilience. But Ratan is not done. The insult in Detroit is still burning. He knows that to truly silence the critics, he cannot just survive in India, he has to win the world. He looks at the map. He looks at the shrinking borders of global trade. He realizes that the Tata Group cannot remain a big fish in a small pond. It is 2006. The global economy is booming. Money is cheap, and Ratan Tata begins to hunt. He starts with tea. The British drink Tetley. It is an icon, twice the size of Tata tea. He says, "Buy it." The financial world gasps. An Indian company buying a British giant? It is a reverse colonization. But Ratan pulls it off. He buys Tetley for £271 million. Then he looks at steel. Corus, the European steel giant, is up for sale. It is 4 times larger than Tata Steel. The bidding war is fierce. The Brazilians want it. But Ratan is relentless. In 2007, he buys Corus for $12 billion. It is the largest foreign acquisition by an Indian company in history. Overnight, Tata Steel becomes the 5th largest steelmaker in the world. The architect has become the conqueror. But the universe has a strange sense of irony. In 2008, a distress call comes from the United States. 2 of the most iconic British luxury car brands are nearing bankruptcy. They are bleeding cash. They are desperate to sell. The owner is Ford. And the man they are calling for help is the man they humiliated 9 years ago. The year is 2008. The scene is the same Ford headquarters in Detroit, but the atmosphere has inverted. The swagger of 1999 is gone, replaced by the desperate math of survival. The global financial crisis is looming. Ford is bleeding cash, shedding assets to keep the lights on. They are putting their crown jewels on the block, Jaguar and Land Rover. These are not just car companies. They are the very symbols of British aristocracy. The Queen drives a Land Rover. The Prime Minister rides in a Jaguar.
But under Ford's management, they are failing. Ratan Tata enters the room. He is older now, his hair grayer, but his gait is steady. He is not there to gloat. He is there to do business. He offers $2.3 billion for the brands. It is an all-cash deal. The irony is thick enough to choke on. The company that was told you know nothing about cars is now writing a check to save the company that insulted them. Bill Ford, the man whose executives had sneered at the Indica, looks at Ratan. "You are doing us a big favor by buying these two brands," he says. The words echo the insult of 1999 almost exactly, but the meaning has flipped entirely. It is the ultimate vindication. Ratan smiles politely. "Thank you," he says. The acquisition sends shockwaves through the UK. The British press is skeptical. They publish cartoons of jaguars being pulled by elephants. They worry that the Indians will strip the assets, close the factories in the Midlands, and move production to cheap labor camps in India. "The empire strikes back," the headlines scream, but with fear, not admiration. Ratan flies to Coventry, England. He stands in a town hall meeting before thousands of worried British workers. They are expecting a ruthless corporate raider. Instead, they hear a soft-spoken gentleman. "I am not here to close your factories," Ratan tells them. "I am here to help you build better cars. You are the experts. I am the enabler." He keeps his word. He does not fire the British management. Instead, he pours billions into research and development. He tells the engineers, "Build the cars you always wanted to build, not the cars the accountants let you build." The result is a renaissance. Jaguar launches the F-Type. Land Rover launches the Evoque. The factories in Solihull and Castle Bromwich hum with 3 shifts a day. The company turns profitable. The British unions who had feared him eventually hail him as the savior of the UK auto industry. Ratan Tata becomes the largest private employer of manufacturing labor in Britain. The colony has saved the colonizer. But amidst the glitz of jaguars and the roar of steel furnaces, Ratan's heart remains in India. He is a man who lives in 2 worlds, the high-altitude air of global acquisitions and the dusty, chaotic streets of Bombay. One rainy evening in Bangalore, while being driven in his armored Mercedes, Ratan looks out the window. He sees a common sight, a family of 4 on a scooter. The father is driving, a child standing between his legs. The mother sits sideways on the back, clutching a baby, struggling to hold an umbrella against the lashing monsoon rain. The scooter skids on the wet road. The family teeters, terrifyingly vulnerable next to the speeding trucks. Ratan flinches. He turns to his driver. "That is not right," he murmurs. "They deserve safety." The image haunts him. He starts sketching again. He dreams of a car that is safer than a scooter, but affordable for the common man. He sets a target price that sounds impossible. 1 lakh rupees, $2,000, a car for the price of a laptop. He calls it the Nano. The project becomes a national obsession. It is not just a product, it is a movement. Ratan wants to democratize transport, just as Jamshedji wanted to democratize luxury with the Taj. But this dream faces hurdles that make the Jaguar deal look easy. He decides to build the factory in Singur, West Bengal. He wants to bring industry to a poor agrarian state, but politics intervenes. A violent political agitation erupts, led by Mamata Banerjee, claiming the land was taken unfairly from farmers. Protesters blockade the factory. Roads are dug up. Tata executives are threatened. Ratan pleads for reason. "If you put a gun to my head, you pull the trigger or you take the gun away," he says in a famous press conference. "I will not move." But the violence escalates. With the factory 90% complete, Ratan makes a heartbreaking decision. He cannot risk his employees' lives. In October 2008, he pulls the plug. He abandons the factory in Singur. It is a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. He moves the project to Gujarat, where Narendra Modi, then chief minister, welcomes him with an SMS, "Welcome." The factory is rebuilt in record time. On March 23, 2009, the Nano is launched.
Ratan drives it onto the stage himself. It is cute, rounded, and impossibly cheap. The world media calls it a revolution. Time magazine calls it the people's car. But the market is a cruel judge. The cheapest car label, meant to be a badge of honor, becomes a stigma. In status-conscious India, nobody wants to be seen driving the poor man's car. Sales are sluggish. Reports of a few cars catching fire damage the brand. The Nano is a commercial failure. It loses money on every unit sold. The shareholders grumble. The analysts say kill it, but Ratan keeps it alive for years, fueled by the memory of that family in the rain. It is a rare stumble in a glorious decade, but as 2008 draws to a close, a far darker shadow is approaching. The titan in the shadows has won his wars in the boardroom and the global market, but he is about to face a war that involves bullets, grenades, and fire. The date is November 26, 2008, and the target is the symbol where it all began, the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel.
The Empire strikes back. The night of November 26, 2008 begins like any other in the opulent lobby of the Taj Mahal Palace. The air smells of lilies and expensive perfume. In the Golden Dragon restaurant, families are celebrating birthdays. In the Shamiana, businessmen are closing deals over coffee. The hotel is full, a microcosm of the world, just as Jamsetji intended. At 9:38 p.m., the illusion of safety shatters. Two young men with backpacks walk through the glass doors. They raise AK-47 assault rifles and open fire. The sound is deafening, alien in this cathedral of silence. Chaos erupts, glass explodes, bodies fall. The terrorists, trained in the mountains of Pakistan, move with chilling precision. They are not just killing, they are hunting. They throw grenades into the elevators. They set fire to the carpets. They take hostages in the suites. Within minutes, the hotel is a war zone. Smoke begins to curl up through the central dome, the same dome that Jamsetji built to signal India's arrival. Now it signals India's vulnerability. Ratan Tata is at home in Colaba, just a few minutes away. When he hears the news, he does not call his PR team. He does not retreat to a bunker. He drives straight to the hotel. He stands outside the police barricades, the orange glow of the flames illuminating his face. He watches his heritage burn. He hears the screams of his guests and his staff. For 3 days and 3 nights, the siege lasts 60 hours. Ratan does not leave the site. He stands sentinel, a silent, grieving guardian. Inside the burning building, a different kind of story is unfolding. It is a story that no business school case study can explain. The employees of the Taj know the secret exits. They know the kitchen routes. They can easily escape, but they don't. The telephone operators stay at their posts, calling guests in their rooms, telling them to lock their doors and stay quiet until the terrorists kick down the operator room door and silence them forever. The chefs in the kitchen form a human shield around the guests, ushering them into the basement chambers. A 24-year-old banquet manager helps guests escape through a window, only to be shot as he goes back for one more family. Of the 31 people who died in the hotel, 11 are Tata employees. Not a single senior manager flees the scene. They stay to die so that their guests might live. When the siege finally ends and the last terrorist is neutralized by the commandos, the hotel is a blackened shell. The lobby is a lake of water and blood. The stench of death is overpowering. Ratan Tata walks into the ruins. He steps over the debris of crystal chandeliers and charred furniture. His heart breaks, but his resolve hardens. Standing in the soot-covered lobby, he makes a pledge to the weeping staff. "We will rebuild," he says, his voice cracking.
every stone, every pillar, and we will take care of everyone. He creates the Taj Public Service Welfare Trust. He does not just compensate the families of the dead employees, he pays them the salary the employee would have earned for the rest of their life. He pays for their children's education worldwide. He pays for the medical bills of every victim, including the police officers and the pedestrians shot outside, people who had nothing to do with the hotel. He visits the homes of the victims personally, sitting on the floor with grieving widows, holding their hands. It is a display of corporate empathy that the world has rarely seen. It reaffirms the core truth of the dynasty. The business exists for the people, not the other way around. 21 months later, the Taj reopens. Ratan stands at the entrance, greeting the guests. The scars are gone. The dome is pristine. It is a message to the terrorists. You can burn our buildings, but you cannot burn our spirit. But while the soul of the group is intact, the body is growing old. By 2011, Ratan Tata is 73. The mandatory retirement age he imposed on the satraps now applies to him. The question of succession, dormant for 2 decades, reawakens with a vengeance. Who can fill these shoes? The empire is now a $100 billion behemoth. It spans 100 countries. It makes salt for the Indian kitchen and luxury SUVs for the Hollywood Hills. It employs 450,000 people. It requires a superhuman. The search committee scours the globe. They interview top executives from around the world, but in the end, they look inward. They choose Cyrus Mystery. Cyrus is young, just 44. He is not a Tata by birth, but his family, the Palonji Group, is the largest shareholder in Tata Sons, 18%. He is an insider, outsider. He is sharp, modern, and quiet. Ratan mentors him for a year. In December 2012, Ratan Tata steps down, hanging up his boots after 21 years. He moves out of the corner office in Bombay House, retreating to a small office in a separate building, intending to spend his retirement playing with his dogs and investing in startups. The transition seems smooth. The world applauds the orderly handover.
But beneath the surface, the tectonic plates are grinding again. The clash of cultures that Ratan fought in 1991 is about to repeat itself. But this time, the war will be between the mentor and the protégé. Cyrus Mystery is a man of the spreadsheet, not the sentiment. When he takes the helm in 2012, he looks at the sprawling empire Ratan built not with the eyes of a creator, but with the eyes of an auditor. And what he sees alarms him. The trophy assets that Ratan acquired, Chorus Steel in Europe, the Nano Project, the telecom business, are bleeding money. The European steel market has collapsed. Chorus is losing millions of dollars a day. The Nano is dead stock filling up factory yards. To Cyrus, the solution is mathematical. Cut the losses, amputate the infected limbs to save the body. He begins to draft plans to sell the UK steel business. He creates a file to shut down the Nano. He moves to settle legal disputes with aggressive payouts. He runs Tata Sons with a cold, pragmatic efficiency. But in doing so, he commits the cardinal sin of the dynasty. He forgets the Tata way. Ratan Tata, watching from his retirement office, grows increasingly restless. He sees Cyrus's moves not as prudence, but as a betrayal of promises. To Ratan, you don't just fire thousands of British steel workers because the market is down. You swore to protect them. You don't kill the Nano just because it's losing money. You promised mobility to the poor. The tension between the two men, the architect of the expansion and the architect of the consolidation, begins to curdle into hostility. The trusts, the charitable bodies that own 66% of Tata Sons and are chaired by Ratan, feel sidelined. They demand answers.
Cyrus, citing corporate independence, refuses to share details. The silence between Bombay House and the trusts becomes a chasm. On October 24, 2016, the tension snaps. It is a Monday afternoon. A board meeting is scheduled in Bombay House. Cyrus Mistry walks into the boardroom on the 4th floor, expecting a routine discussion about the quarter's performance. He carries his papers, unaware that the room is already set against him. As he takes his seat, the door opens. Ratan Tata walks in. The room goes deadly silent. Ratan is not a board member anymore. He is the emeritus chairman. His presence is a violation of protocol unless something momentous is about to happen. Behind him walks Nitin Noria, the dean of Harvard Business School and a Tata director. Noria speaks first. "Cyrus," he says, his voice steady but tense, "the relationship with the trusts is not working. The board has decided to replace you." Cyrus is stunned. He looks around the table. The directors, men he has worked with for 4 years, refuse to meet his eyes. He calls it illegal. He protests, but the decision has been made. In a move that shocks the polite, genteel world of the Parsis, the chairman is fired on the spot. He is given minutes to pack his things. It is a corporate execution. Ratan Tata, at the age of 78, steps back into the breach. He is named interim chairman. The media explodes. The battle of the boardrooms spills onto the front pages. Cyrus fires back with a barrage of accusations, leaking letters that allege mismanagement, ego-driven acquisitions, and ethical lapses by Ratan. The curtain is pulled back on the dynasty. The public sees the ugly machinery of power. For the first time, the Tata name is dragged through the mud of litigation and public spats. Ratan's reputation as the saint of business takes a hit. He is painted by Mistry's camp as an insecure patriarch who couldn't let go of the reins. But Ratan ignores the noise. He has a ship to stabilize. He needs a new captain, not an outsider, not a family member, but a professional who understands the soul of the group. He turns to a man who has spent his entire life climbing the Tata ladder, a man who built the software giant TCS into a cash machine. He turns to Natarajan Chandrasekaran, known simply as Chandra. In January 2017, Chandra is named the chairman of Tata Sons. It is a historic moment. He is not a Parsi. He does not have a double-barreled surname. He is a computer engineer from a farming family in Tamil Nadu. His appointment sends a clear message. The dynasty is evolving. Meritocracy is the new lineage. Chandra takes over a group in turmoil. His mandate is impossible: fix the balance sheet without killing the soul. He has to do what Cyrus wanted to do, clean up the debt, but do it with the grace that Ratan demands. He works with a quiet, lethal efficiency. He sells the mobile phone business. He merges the consumer divisions. He settles the steel issues in Europe, not by firing everyone, but entering a joint venture. He makes the hard calls, but he keeps the trusts in the loop. The stock market cheers. The profits return. The controversy of the coup begins to fade into history.
But as the corporate storms settle, the final chapter of the saga shifts away from the boardrooms. The focus returns to the man who started the modern era, the man who is now walking slowly into the twilight. Ratan Tata is over 80. He has no wife. He has no children. He lives in a modest house on the seafront with his German shepherds. He has saved the empire twice, once from irrelevance in 1991 and once from fracture in 2016. But he has one final duty left. He must ensure that the eternal flame, the spirit of the trusts that Jamsetji lit 150 years ago, will burn long after he is gone. The eternal flame. In the final act of his life, Ratan Tata does something unexpected.
Instead of fading into the secluded world of the billionaire class, he turns toward the youth. He realizes that the future of India is no longer in heavy steel plants, but in the digital cloud. He begins to invest his personal wealth in startups, Ola, Paytm, Lenskart. He sits in coffee shops with 25-year-old founders, listening to their pitch decks with the same intensity he once gave to Henry Kissinger. He becomes an unlikely icon for the Instagram generation, revered not for his wealth, but for his humility. He is often seen in his custom-built retirement bungalow in Colaba, or driving his own car on Marine Drive on Sunday mornings, unaccompanied by security guards. He is the lion in winter, scarred by battles, but resting in the warmth of a nation's affection. Then, on October 9, 2024, the news breaks. Ratan Tata passes away at the age of 86. The reaction is visceral. It is not the polite mourning reserved for a corporate tycoon. It is the grief of a family losing its patriarch. Social media timelines are flooded not with charts of his net worth, but with stories of his kindness, the stray dogs he sheltered at Bombay House, the medical bills he quietly paid for strangers, the time he flew economy class. The government declares a day of state mourning. As his body lies in state at the National Center for the Performing Arts, thousands of Mumbaikars, from billionaire CEOs to street vendors, line up in the humidity to pay their last respects. They are not honoring a man who made money. They are honoring a man who kept a promise. His passing brings the unique structure of the Tata Group into sharp focus for the world to see. In an era of rapacious capitalism, where profits are privatized and billionaires race to build rockets for their own vanity, the Tata model stands alone. 66% of the equity of Tata Sons, the holding company of the entire $300 billion empire, is held by the Tata Trusts. This means that for every 100 rupees the group earns in profit, 66 rupees do not go to the Tata family. They go back to the people of India. They fund the Tata Memorial Hospital, which treats cancer patients for free. They fund the Indian Institute of Science. They fund water projects in Rajasthan and schools in the Northeast. It is a capitalist engine fueling a socialist heart. The family does not own the wealth, they are merely the trustees of it. With Ratan gone, the stewardship of this sacred trust passes to his half-brother, Noel Tata. It is a quiet transition, devoid of the drama of 2016. The system works. The institution is stronger than the individual. The sun begins to set over Jamshedpur, the city carved out of the jungle a century ago. The shift whistle blows at the steel plant, a sound that has marked time for generations. In the center of the city lies Jubilee Park. It is a lush, green oasis, exactly as Jamshedji had commanded on his deathbed. In the middle of the park stands a bronze statue of the founder, and beside it there is a flame. It is not a large fire. It is a modest, steady flame, protected from the wind. It has burned without interruption for decades. This story began with a young man humiliated outside a hotel because of the color of his skin. It ends with an empire that employs 1 million people of every color, caste, and creed. It began with a dream of independence. It ends with a global powerhouse that saved the icons of its former colonizers. The factories will rust, the cars will change, the technology will evolve, but the legacy of the House of Tata is not in the iron or the code. It is in the invisible, unbreakable contract between the corporation and the conscience. They proved that you can build a skyscraper without crushing the flowers at its feet. They proved that the greatest profit is not what you keep, but what you give away. The flame in Jamshedpur flickers against the darkening sky, but it does not go out. The titans sleep, but the fire burns on.